Alright, now I have to wait to do the sound check element of it. Say something?
Okay.
Alright, that's a word.
That's good enough.
Let me make sure. Say something?
Okay.
Alright, you know, that is a problem. There is some static here. Let me see if I can resolve that before we get going here.
And if it's on my end, maybe I have a corded mic.
I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I think it's just a matter of this. Okay, alright.
Oh, so much better.
Yeah, there we go. This is a very old mic. I got it for cheap.
It sounds good now.
5 or 6 years ago, and I haven't I haven't upgraded since. So sometimes it has old technology issues where, and it like the thing is, I got it for like less than $100. The whole setup, the arm, the phantom power supply, the microphone, the cables, the little cable that plugs into the PC. So basically, it's professional audio, but it's fucking less than $100 for the setup. And I tell people about this, but I don't tell them that if you're not careful, extremely careful with these cheap-ass cables that aren't made of, like, woven anything and anything like that, they will gradually damage the connection and you'll have to fuck with them like that, like a headphone cable. Anyway, fucking, let me tweet this out and shit. Normally I'm not talking about audio engineering bullshit right at the beginning, but here we are. This is an interview with a teacher, a tutor or a teacher. Which do you prefer to be referred to as?
I was never really a teacher. I was a tutor, but within the school system. So.
Right. Well, you know, I feel like a teacher is nothing more than a tutor, if you think about it. Like, if a teacher is supposed to tell a kid how they're supposed to think or how to learn, then I don't know. I see very little distinction between the two.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah, right? And plus, I think we all should teach everybody, like everybody in our circles. I think that's part of one of the things that you're going to go into today, which is unschooling, and that's like, you know, unconventional learning. So, I don't know. It feels weird to say that anybody isn't a teacher. I think teacher is one of those things like doctor, where people get very pretentious about the title, and like, you're not a teacher, you don't have X shiny paper. Anyway, just to get into that.
Most teachers are very mediocre anyway.
Yes.
I can say that from experience, so.
100%. Like, a lot of them just don't give a shit. Like,
No, they were C students. They graduated, they got a degree, couldn't find a job, and thought, oh, I'll go into teaching. It's the path of least resistance. You get good benefits, and that's every teacher I know.
And of course, like, a lot of them were like bullied in school, so this is their chance to get back at people while still being a nerd. Yeah.
Yes, my son had a psychopathic 4th grade teacher.
Yeah. Anyway, so just to establish some basics here, because it's off to a weird start, but establish some basics, like, what was your path into teaching, would you say?
Okay, let's see. What was my path into teaching? I didn't have anything else I could do. I was in school getting a degree in sociology, not because I wanted to be a sociologist, because I was brought up that you go to college. I went to the lowest ranked college in California, public CS. It was Dominguez Hills. So anyway, I could get parking. It was good enough.
Yeah, right?
And when I started, I needed a job. So I thought I could tutor. And I just lucked into this job that I ended up loving. I was there about 3 years. My husband, in the meantime, was working on his master's, and then he went on for his doctorate, and then I had quit my job so we could move to Washington.
So we're both in the same state. That's interesting.
We're in California now. We're back in California, but we were up in Washington and this was like the early 90s, like 93, 94.
So you were here for like the rise of what could be considered outcome-based education then.
Yes.
All
I
right.
was around for whole language,
Mm.
which was even worse.
Why don't you talk about that then?
Sure. So whole language was the great idea to um, take phonics out of reading and incorporate sight reading. And English is not the kind of language that sight reading works well for. Um, the whole language program was since discredited. It was based on Soviet techniques for classroom management. And in my experience, what I saw was that the kids I worked with were predominantly English as a second language. So they ended up being illiterate in two languages. Uh, the kids learned no history, but instead, in every one of their classes, learned about Gandhi, Mother Teresa, and Islam. And this was back in 90, 91, 92. And those kids could not read.
Yeah. Well, and also just gonna get this out of the way. Mother Teresa was a sociopath and a
I
grifter.
agree. I
Like,
agree.
let's watch people suffer and fucking do nothing about it because it brings you closer to God. Gandhi was similar. Like, why why were these people celebrated? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Oh, Cesar Chavez. I forgot Cesar Chavez. He was another one that was focused on. And
But okay,
every kid got that.
I okay. This might be exposure of a little bit of ignorance here. I don't actually know why that would be.
Why, which would be?
Cesar Chavez, like, can you talk about what they would tell you to
Oh,
say?
it was just what they taught. So he was a Mexican activist, farm laborer, and he implemented change within the farming, like the migrant farm workers, which was applicable because the kids I worked with,
Um,
Mexican, and their parent.
Sorry,
You're cutting out?
it froze for just a second. It should be back up right now. From what it looks like, the data just interrupted for a second. You can go back to speaking.
Okay. So I didn't have, so I didn't have, I don't even have a problem necessarily that kids were taught about these figures. It's that they didn't know how to read.
Yeah,
Like,
it's that was
I
what
thought
they
that
taught
was more
first.
important. Yes.
Yeah,
Well, they were, yeah. But I wasn't around for their elementary school education. I was there for their middle school, and very, very few of them were literate.
right. So okay, so how would you have changed, I guess, their early education to make them more literate?
Phonics
So just like
and
reading how it looked.
that's whole language. So phonics is
Okay.
learning the rules of English. So,
Okay.
like pH is fa, makes the fa
Right.
sound, and the sounds of the letters, and then you put them together to
Yeah,
make
I guess
sounds.
because like I was in elementary school in like the mid to late 90s and then the early 2000s, like
Oh, you were whole language.
y- y- so well, I they started people on phonics in the place where I was. Um
Ish,
like
ish,
probably, yeah.
probably.
Yeah. Um so what I'm thinking is that there was a transition period uh when you were like sort of moving on to other sort of pastures in that regard, um, and the transition was happening live while I was going through schooling. So
Yes.
why don't you talk about that transition?
I I see. Okay. So I'm quite a bit older than you are. I graduated high school in 1986. So I kind of got the tail end of traditional schooling,
Right.
as fantastic as it was. I'm being sarcastic. It was
Hmm.
not fantastic. But we learned to read and write. There was some academic rigor. We did learn some history, whether it's was accurate or not, can't say. But there there was some rigor. By the time I was teaching, for the couple of years, a lot had changed, but a lot more changed from the early 90s to about 2010 or 11, right before Common Core. And when I really started having a problem with schooling was around 2010.
So,
And
what's the difference between Common Core for the plebeians? What's the difference between Common Core and the previous model?
Common Core is a federalization of curriculum. They lied and said it wasn't about curriculum. Totally is about curriculum. It's a standardized curriculum and outcome for all students that's based on proficiency and not excellence. They don't care about anyone excelling. They want to bring up the kids that are not proficient. They don't care about the kids who are already proficient. So that's what the focus is on.
Right. Okay. So instead of trying to encourage people to outshine their other classmates and like emphasizing performance and putting people on honor roll and shit, this system instead chooses to homogenize people and encourage the most consistent performance between students, at least on paper.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And they want to get as many, they want to get 100% of their student, and this is every elementary, this is every public school K through 12. They want 100% of their students to be proficient. That's the goal on these tests they base everything on.
Right. So
Benchmark assessments. You hear these new terms coming up.
so basically
So
it would be like bubble tests emphasized.
yes,
And
yes, exactly.
so
And and teachers teach to the test.
okay, so what would be the flaws with that particular methodology? I've got a lot to say here, but like hearing it from the guest is usually the optimal choice.
Okay, let's see. The best way to put it, I'm trying. Let me think how to answer your question the best way. Common Core makes it so that classroom teachers who should know their students, their strengths and their weaknesses and their differences in learning, are supposed to homogenize the kids. It is completely standardized. Uh, there's no thinking outside of the box. Whatever, I'm not even. But today, I'm not even. I think Common Core essentially has failed already. Just in the last 7 years, it's been implemented, and now they're pushing activism, and social justice and social emotional learning, SEL, it's called,
Mm.
which is all part of the outcome-based education. And to break that down, I think the best way, if I can find where I wrote it, essentially, let's see. Okay, so this is what it is. It's the state as the manufacturer, corporations are the consumer, and the kids are the product.
Right. Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell.
I've got somebody in chat who says I think he was either recently in school or is. He says Nikuma says they want to make the children into factory workers.
Yes,
Yeah, because like I mean,
or worse.
right? Yeah. And of course, like you know, the whole thing is designed to pump them into a place like Silicon Valley, or um, like a corporate farm, or some sort of like, they don't want kids doing trades. They don't want kids learning how to do concrete things. They don't want kids like being artists for themselves. It has to be for some big
Or
development firm.
entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
They're all
no.
entrepreneurial. Yep, exactly.
So, okay, so with that churn, how many kids would you say you interacted with who felt like they had to suppress things, and could you like elaborate on their specific cases without getting specific enough that you like dox a kid, but like,
Oh, well, and besides, this was the kids I interacted with. This was from 92. They're all adults
right,
now. Um, Mostly the population that I worked with is not to be politically incorrect, but they don't come, migrant farm workers don't typically focus on education. Don't blame them. I, that I don't have a problem with that. Um, However, my job was to help get their test scores up. I did that by treating the kids with respect and caring about them. I loved them. So I got to know each of them. And there was a group of us, and we would work with small groups. Kids didn't know anything. Like, they didn't know enough to ask a question about the material. So we would go over it. We, we helped with some writing. We helped with some math. We could explain some basic math. Uh, Really, we offered support, emotional support, and that worked the best. And we saw successes even in their test scores. Uh, anyway, they need attention, and they need to be loved and
so
not yelled at.
okay, so who was yelling at them?
Teachers, their teachers in the classrooms, the kids would misbehave, all of them. And the teachers, you could hear teachers yelling at their kids.
Yeah,
And
I can see you're getting like tears
the
in your eyes
textbooks they
thinking
were,
about it.
oh, it's sad. Oh, it was so sad. And the kids' textbooks they had were falling apart. And they said, the kids don't deserve any better. Look at what they do to the textbooks. There was plenty of funding because at that time, the federal government was really promoting. They had lots of funds for Title I schools. Had I was paid through an innovative grant. I worked for a woman who was really interested in the kids. She was kind of a hippie. I liked her very much. And so she had some really fun, interesting, outside of the box kind of methods that that I respected. But the funding, I think, has since been cut off. So it's just completely different.
So basically, they tried this method. It improved things, but it didn't improve things enough for the state to be satisfied. Is that what it is?
It improved things just in the school I was in. So this woman that I worked for, she was a teacher there, and she wrote grants. So she would apply for grants that she had ideas that were implemented in the school. The district took notice, but I think, I don't know, something happened, and I can't remember what happened in the mid-90s, but funding was pulled.
Well, I
So,
mean, they were ramping up to throw that funding at the military-industrial complex for some
hmm
totally not planned wars in the Middle East.
right, there you go.
Yeah, right?
Yep.
I think that's around the time when the Al Shifa pharmaceutical factory was bombed, and the war crimes in Kosovo and shit, right?
Yes, I think so,
Yeah, so
if
I
I
mean,
remember right.
they were ramping
Yep.
up for their preferred mode of spending. Um,
Yeah. And we spend more on military than we do education.
Yeah, and
And
well,
we spend a lot on education.
and and like I think the worst part of that is that what it says to the kids is you better listen to that recruiter that comes in because that recruiter is your ticket out of here. We ain't paying for shit.
Yeah, I heard you talk about the push towards nationalism within the schools, but what I saw was a push towards globalism. All of the social studies books, instead of talking about for worse, um, civil rights, the Constitution, the founding fathers of America, it is since the early 90s, there's been a huge push towards being a good global citizen.
Well, so by nationalism, what I meant is the sort of national identity that comes with like things like the Pledge of Allegiance being practiced by people who can't consent, by things like, singing national anthems and, talking about like American history while glossing over the bad parts so that, no matter which student you are, you're going to sort of consider yourself a part of the system so that when they shit you out into corporate America, you won't be a disgruntled worker by default. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't think nationalism and globalism are incompatible. And so what my point was that when you're talking about nationalism from a perspective of like, I guess you could say like a right wing nationalist, it's a lot different than when you consider nationalism as a component of globalism, which is what people like Soros, WEF, the fucking Bilderberg group, that's what all of them want. They want each nation to have as part of its national identity the globe. Because then it makes it
Okay.
easier to, traffic the military industrial complex as a way to police trade routes and shit.
Yeah. I think I understand what you're saying. I think when I was in school, we took government, Western Civ, we didn't learn very much about other countries,
Right.
not like, and now it's a lot bigger, and the world is different. I mean, granted, uh, they don't. I don't think kids learn much about American history. I don't know that they could tell you which came first, the Revolutionary War or the Civil War. Most of them.
Well, I think it's mostly that they don't have to care because I think they don't learn much about anything. Um, because
True.
what the goal is to jizz like results onto a test form. Um, so like instead of helping them foster the knowledge in their minds of any of this stuff, they're taught it to the test, and then once they get to the test, they they get it all out there, and then they don't have to think about it anymore. And that's the mentality. It's not I'm excited to learn about this because I'm going to be a great citizen and a great person. It's I'm going to learn just remember, memorize
Yes,
just enough
yes,
that I can jizz it onto a form, right?
yes, exactly. It's even when I was in school, so when I went to college, there was the big push, general ed. We want general ed because we want well-rounded citizens. Well, yeah, well, there's well-rounded like a basketball, and there's well-rounded like a freaking pancake. And we were like pancakes. We just got very basic, and now they've done away with most survey courses. So you're not even round like a pancake.
Yeah.
It's
Well, and the worst part of that is that like there's this image floating around that I think relatively well sums it up. It's this teacher going around and cutting kids' thought bubbles, which are all these weird
yes,
shapes into squares.
yes, I love that. That's exactly right.
And,
And and another thing that you brought up before, and this is what triggered my thinking, changed my thinking, is when I realized how similar schools are to prisons.
mm-hmm.
They are. I have this little graphic, that lays out exactly how they're the same. Except it didn't include freedom of association,
Right?
which I think was a big one. It is a big one that schools completely lack that. You are stuck who you're stuck with. That's why bullying is such a problem.
Yeah.
Bullying only happens when you can't get away. So in prison, at school, in the workplace, and sometimes at home,
Right.
which is heartbreaking.
And so okay, so first off, you've got notes. You're free to read the differences as you see them.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, or actually, it's the similarities, right?
Okay,
Because there
sorry,
aren't
yeah,
that many
yeah, yeah.
differences. So there's the authoritarian structure of both. Both have dress codes. There's an emphasis on silence and order. They work on negative reinforcement rather than positive. Everybody has to walk in lines. There's loss of individual autonomy, abridged freedoms, and in schools sometimes they don't have any freedom, well, or in prison, I guess. There's no input in decision making. There's set times enforced for walking,
Yeah.
eating, socializing, and then like this lack of freedom of association.
Well, and okay, and I can actually sort of speak to the because part of the problem is that you want to talk about being stuck in a space. That's what compulsory schooling would be, even if they didn't use negative reinforcement primarily. And to me, what I see is when you're in this compulsory schooling model where you're forced to learn a specific thing. Like, I've got Earth Nerd Anarchist in chat saying no consideration for intrinsic motivation and how that's the glue that makes information stick. Um, it's sort of like, even if you're using positive reinforcement, what it is then, like,
It's
it's Jolly
still
Ran.
conditioning.
Yeah,
It's still conditioning.
it's like Jolly Ranchers and nerds and Smarties and other little sugar things, and
Crap.
yeah, and like shit ass food in the cafeteria that's like, sorry, it cut out again. It's like shit ass food in the cafeteria that's like mostly there for carbs. It's there for like stimulating the carnal primal parts of your mind, not the, we're going to like be fit and strong and amazing. It's not good for your brain. And the reason I bring that up is because I always compare the positive conditioning elements to Pavlovian conditioning. They want the bells, the tones, the whistles, the everything to mimic tonal sort of recognition in your brain so that you think the only way I get positive feedback is if I do what I'm told.
Yes.
And if I
Yeah.
don't do what I'm told, then I get negative feedback. So I need to do what I'm told all the time.
Yes. And, when you were talking about the poor quality of the food, that combined with sleep deprivation, that's like what cults do. That's what cults do. And my kid, when he was in school, he was sick all the time. And then he was punished for being sick.
It's also what
But he caught it at school.
it's also what torture sites do. They'll fuck with your
Yes.
sleep patterns and make you get up before dawn.
Yes. And it's terrible. Anyway, I think it's inhumane. And I don't think any child should be subjected to it. Maybe if it's better than their home life, that breaks my heart. Um,
Yeah, and
but
that's one of the reasons. Like Nikuma also said, he thinks it's mainly the parents, and Earth Nerd says, or you just get not abused. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, so I mean, the ultimate, I think it's like one of those loops. And this is where I get into my more negative conspiratorial way of phrasing it. It's like trauma bonding.
yes,
They'll fuck with you. They'll cause negative stimulus, and then they'll punish you for responding negatively to it, and they'll treat you like an awesome person if you're willing to kowtow, if you're willing to do what you're told, and etc.
yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that, but it's just another reason. Yes, it's bad.
Yeah.
It's bad. And and again, the John Taylor Gatto was a huge influence for me, as was Charlotte Iserby and Samuel Blumenfeld. Blumenfeld. All three come from a different political background, so they're not just parroting each other, but they all came to the same conclusions. And John Taylor Gatto talked about teachers, like at best, they're benevolent strangers. At worst, they are psychopaths or child molesters. We don't hear very much about the sexual abuse that goes on in public schools. We heard all about the priests.
Mm-hmm.
Schools are worse. And I know from direct experience, in my high school, where there was a photography teacher, and every year he slept with he picked 3 or 4 girls, and everyone knew, and nothing happened. And I watched that when I was in the intermediate school teaching, and it still happens.
Right. Well, so on that level, would you say that the problem primarily results from the structure, or from the fact that people have been conditioned to this structure by previous structures? That being, is the actual letter of the structure what's the problem, or is it tradition that causes this structure to be cemented and implemented across generations regardless of effect? Or is it a mix of both?
I think it's a mix of both. I think fundamentally, if it's compulsory, then you can't get good fruit from a rotten plant. And if it's compulsory, it's rotten.
So why would you say that is?
Because we don't have the right to compel anyone to do anything. And if we don't have the right to do it as individuals, the government doesn't have the right to do that. They don't have any other rights than we do.
And so what you're saying then is that the compulsory nature of school creates the incentive structure for excusing unethical action.
Sure. I would say that.
And so...
And I would also say that the mediocrity that the schools... The best and the brightest do not go into teaching, generally, and they generally don't go into administration.
Mm-hmm.
And we can separate out administration and teaching, but that's kind of just details.
Well, details are fine. I'm all about details. So what would you say is the key difference between somebody who seeks an administrative job and somebody who seeks the teaching job?
Oh, money, mainly. And anymore, just in the last 7 or 8 years, I think, administration has gotten more and more top-heavy. And when critical race theory, for example, has come up and has reared its ugly head, that has come from the top down. That's not coming. There are teachers who have bought into it, sure, but the administration are the ones that really pushed it. They pushed social justice. They pushed the anti-bullying, all of the kind of feel-good indoctrination nonsense has come from the administration down.
So would you say anti-bullying is a bad thing to educate, or?
I think in theory, it's fine. In practice, my son, that's one of the reasons I pulled my son out of school. He was not learning any science, but he was getting plenty of anti-bullying rhetoric and seminars, and they would do whole two full days of anti-bullying, and the kids just got meaner.
It's like, oh yeah, let me, that's a great way to bully. Let me add that to my book.
Yes, and it was like that with drug education. Like they just taught us how to use them and gave us ideas.
Yeah, and like abstinence education. Don't do this, don't do that. Okay, I'll definitely do that. I'm a rebellious kid,
Yes.
and I'm shoved in this
And
structure.
yes, and I'm miserable and I have no other, I don't have any control over my life, but I have control over this. That- That's it worked it worked on me. I mean, I bought into all the crap that we were inadvertently taught, uh, hook, line, and sinker. So
Yeah.
I know how well it works.
So okay, on that score, I know that you prefer alternative education models, and I know that when you pulled your kid out, you started to do something called unschooling. Why don't we go into that a
Radical
little bit?
unschooling. Sure. I found a woman, her name is Sandra Dodd, and she created something called radical unschooling. It's kind of she may have trademarked it. And what that is, if I can, a very simplistic way of putting it is student led. However, it isn't merely student led. The way we practice it really is an extension of attachment parenting, where children are individuals, they are autonomous, and they all have different needs. And it's a parent's job to create an environment where the child is free to become whomever he or she is. And the parent's job is to provide opportunities that will interest the child, and help the child. Like if a child's interested in gardening, then it would be like it was my job to as possible. So when we first took our son out of school, it was in 7th grade. We spent about a year on deschooling. So it was sort of like it was like a year-long summer vacation. We didn't talk about, actually, it took me the first 6 months, I tried to homeschool, and it was a disaster. Then we deschooled, and then it was amazing. It was amazing. Some of it was I was worrisome in that he slept a lot, he hibernated. So when my son was 13, 14 mostly, he slept 12 or 15 hours sometimes a day. He was up mostly at night. He played a bunch of video games. I let him play as many video games. If that's what he wanted to do, I bought them for him. I let him. And I worried, and I wrung my hands, and I was afraid, like, oh, am I doing him a disservice? However, I knew that what he wasn't getting from school was better. He was better off playing video games than what he would be getting in school. So I white knuckled it through that period. And when he was 16, he got on his own. He said, I need a driver's license. So I helped him, get a driver's license. He wanted a job. I said, great, what can I do to help? He said, nothing. So I stepped back, and he was interested in gemology. And at 16, that kid got a job at a jewelry store, which I would have never, I didn't think anyone would hire him. And I was wrong. And it was sort of an apprenticeship. He's still at the same store. He's 23 now. He has he's a certified gemologist. He's into it. He loves it. He may not stay with it forever, but we just did everything we could to help him reach his goals.
Right. So basically, it was hands off, and then eventually he decided what he wanted to do, and like just chose to learn enough skills that that was what he did.
Yeah, and he it was interesting because to get his certification in gemology required um, a college level courses. Now, mind you, the kid had a seventh grade education. He aced all of his classes. He did so because he was interested, and he learned when he needed to learn the math that was required. He learned it,
Right.
and I didn't have to teach it to him.
And he didn't have to go through all the massive amount of extra information that he would
Ex-
get
that
from like, go ahead.
exactly that he didn't need, didn't want, didn't understand. Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So, my question to you is like pros and cons. What would you say that would have been done better in an unschooling in his unschooling environment, and what do you think was done like the best it could have been?
Okay, let's see. So, okay, say it again.
What like pros and cons? What would you say could have been done better, and what was done
Okay.
as best as it could?
Well, okay, so it what my approach wasn't really hands off because that almost me almost here neglect. There was no neglect. I was constantly available when he wanted me. I wasn't inflicting myself on him. So um, there were other like he was interested in exotic strawberries.
Hmm.
So we like went. We would go to Home Depot. We bought like all the stuff we needed. We looked. I helped him look online for where he can buy exotic strawberry seeds. That kind of thing. So I just facilitated whatever he was interested in. I helped facilitate that. Um, I don't think there are any cons. The only cons might be is if a parent is late, like is there's neglect, or if trying to like what else might be a con. My son isn't naturally all that social, so he wasn't around a bunch of kids his age. I suppose if I could do it again, I would have never sent him to school, and we would have joined some homeschool co-op when he was like in kindergarten. And so he would have a group of friends he could grow up with that way. However, he is always, as an only child, he really has always related better to adults anyway. And so, like when he got his job, he was working with adults, and he seemed happy with that. And so, I didn't look at it as too much of a problem. I sometimes I worry, like maybe he missed um, chances to socialize with kids his age. Although we he was provided those opportunities. He was in acting, theater, and uh, he did scouting for a little while, but he didn't like it.
And like the Boys and
But
Girls Club exists pretty much fucking everywhere, so
yeah, and so if like, and we belonged to a church
yeah.
that he chose not to attend, so that was fine. But I offered social opportunities, and I I would drive anywhere. Um, there's unschooling camps for kids like him, so that was all offered, and he wasn't that interested. So that was fine, and he doesn't feel like he missed much.
So
Uh,
what is a homeschooling co-op? I've never heard of those.
that's where groups family groups get together, and they work together. And so, like, maybe one parent might be a good cook, so maybe they would have like a cooking demonstration, and it would all be hands-on. But they're independent, just groups of families,
Right.
and they work together.
So basically, instead of having government appointed figures that like are allegedly experts but oftentimes aren't, these people would be able to demonstrate their expertise actively and earn the kids'
Yes,
respect rather than.
yes, exactly.
Yeah. So okay. So,
And
go ahead.
and the upside to that too is if you have to work, if both parents or one or whatever, if the parents have to work, if you're with a co-op, then you have somebody, your child isn't left alone during the day, because
Right.
that's not okay. That's not okay.
Yeah, because well, solitary confinement is torture,
Yes.
and if they're forced to
And
be
I
in the.
wanted to avoid that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, and also like some schools actively employ solitary now.
I
You,
know. I know.
I've I've seen like chambers, like padded cells that they throw kids in. I've seen like
In special ed
yeah,
too. Oh, it's awful.
I've seen crosses that they'll like put kids on that like they don't recognize the irony and like ECT but not ECT for torture purposes, and it's like yeah, let's put kids here. That's a good environment. That's gonna. And then like even the places that don't do that are full of fucking cops.
Yes, yeah, that started when I was in school in the 80s. They started bringing in dogs, just drug sniffing dogs. So it's been going on a long time.
And it's like the war on drugs has been so effective outside of school. Let's put it here too.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So,
Yeah, I was there for all of the mandatory minimums, and with drug sentencing. Oh, what a nightmare.
what can you talk about that? Like, how did that affect some of the kids you know? Do you have any horror stories?
Oh, yeah, somebody had a tab of acid and get 10 years, mandatory 10 years in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
School to prison
or a
pipeline.
Vicodin. Yeah, yeah. And zero tolerance is a, a nightmare. Um, that was a policy. I don't know if I think they do. That's
You,
still implemented.
when I was a kid, they had that, and it always struck me that they told us to be tolerant the rest of the day, and then they had that.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
And then, like, they don't consider the fact, or they don't care about the fact that the lack of tolerance there exhibits a lack of empathy for a kid's like economic situation or their home life or whatever, and it doesn't consider any of that. It doesn't consider that maybe the kid's on Vicodin because he's abused and helps him feel numb, you know.
Yes, yep, exactly. And the kids who are neurodivergent, the system is not equipped to handle them. They try to mainstream. Anyway, it is such a clusterfuck. The system cannot be rehabilitated. It has to be burned down.
Yeah.
And until parents refuse to send their kids, I don't see that happening. Although COVID, I don't know, things have shut down.
That's one thing. Like, just to personalize it a little, I'm bipolar. I'm neurodivergent, and I was not given like any sort of slack in that regard. They
Or
didn't.
support.
Yeah, they didn't know about bipolarism, much less care about bipolarism in kids, and all the stuff that they were trying to say. Well, he might be ADHD. He might be, socially retarded. He might be something like,
Oppositional defiance.
yeah, he might have all these things, and they were just throwing darts. And then eventually, I'm an adult and I'm, seeing a therapist, and she says bipolar. And she didn't even say it because she walked out of the room with my chart on the table once, and I looked at some of the things that she had been kicking around the office, proverbially speaking. And, like, bipolar was written down. And I said, so is that what you think I am? Because I'm ENTJ, I'm commander type. I like to understand enough about a situation that I can take control of it and move forward. So if I'm bipolar, that labels it. That gives me something to hold on to so that I can,
You can work with it.
yeah. And so I asked her, and she's like, yeah, you pretty much meet all the symptoms of, like, extreme bipolarism. And it explained everything. It explained why, when I was a kid, I needed a nap. It explained why, when I was a kid, I would have extreme high energy levels one day and then extreme depression the next. It explained why they thought they could treat me with antidepressants because sometimes I was very depressed. But it also, like, actually explained the depression itself because it's a chemical imbalance and my chemicals don't replenish quickly enough. If I had known these things when I was a kid, and I knew that I could ride the ebb and flow rather than be stuck to their staccato rhythm, if I had realized that, my brain doesn't work like other people's do, and the reason I could be in gifted and talented education in one breath and also get shit grades the next is because I wasn't being allowed to use my gifts at their ultimate peak. And that made me resent school. As soon as it really clicked that they had ignored my bipolarism and shoved me into this box, and that this was the reason that I had such a hard time with school because they were literally ignoring my psychological needs. It gave me this visceral hatred that I already had because, bipolar, but it peaked it, and it basically I've been stuck at that level of hatred ever since, and only rising in other areas. So, like, I think the school system it really goes back to its Prussian roots. It's all about that entrainment of, service to authority figures.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And let me say something. We are so similar, you and I. I have very severe ADHD, and I'm also cyclothymic. And I had the same problems as you. I couldn't stay awake in school. I was punished for not being able to stay awake. It wasn't my, I didn't know. Nobody knew. It impacted my behavior. Anyway, I just can relate so closely. Yeah, anyway.
Okay, let me ask you, because they did this with me. I want to know if they were just as harsh with you, or maybe even more. We're in a different way, different flavors of sadism. When I would fall asleep, there were teachers that would make me stand up in the back of the room. You got that too?
I had to hug a tree. Oh, I had to go outside and hug a tree for the whole class.
Okay, because basically,
and 11th grade. Yep,
that just let me learn how to sleep standing up.
Yeah, right. I remember saying to the teacher, like, at least I can get out of this hot damn classroom, and I can go sleep outside.
Yeah, right. So you would just lean against the tree and fall asleep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because I needed it.
Yeah, because we were forced to be awake at stupid hours. We were forced to come into school, be fed a bunch of sugar, and then those carbs would fade away, but we still had to go through physical education, which is really more trials and drills for can we recruit you to our sports teams. And all of this feeds back into this mechanism of hyper-competitiveness where the other students are competing for bullshit reasons, and they all learn to jockey for their positions in their talentless hack trees. And they form this society of factory workers who aren't very intelligent in, any given subject, but who still feel like they're awesome because the teachers told them they were if they did what they were told. So
Yep.
they emphasize authoritarianism. They're the ones who don't consider themselves Karens, even though they're snitching on people for being with their family in public without masks. You know?
Yes. Yes. That's right. And it teaches the kids. I mean, they're from K through whenever they finally quit going to school. Um, it's a deference to authority. I mean, can I, may I go to the bathroom? I mean,
Right.
that's ridiculous. You have to ask permission for everything. Sometimes they said no.
Yeah.
Remember that?
And
What a
some
blast that was.
and like I remember vividly. I was in like 5th grade, and this I'm not gonna say his name in case for some reason he watches, but he uh kept on asking and asking and asking, and the teacher kept on saying no and no and no, and eventually he got this really red expression on his face,
Oh,
and you could tell what happened, and he tried to laugh it off anyway by, and I'm not
oh,
joking, singing "Oops, I Did It Again" by Britney Spears. That and the class laughed with him instead of at him because of that until they found out what happened. So, I think that whole structure just creates people who are used to abuse.
trauma. They're traumatized. That to be like that kid. Oh, like just it's public humiliation.
Yeah. And it didn't help that the entire school system was built around this conformity because the closest local job in this ass end of nowhere sticks ass rural area was the military. You joined the military, or you became a cop, or you became a social worker.
The people that became a cop that I went to school with. Okay, it was like the females that went into teaching, the
Mm-hmm.
guys that had like the path of least resistance. They needed a job, became cops.
Yeah. And
I
the,
did drugs with all of them. I mean, I know what they're up. I mean, I knew who they were.
and now they still do drugs. They just steal it from the
Mhm.
evidence lockup when they lock up
Yes,
people for doing them.
yes, and there's very little difference between, you know, the ones on this side of the bars and the ones on this side of the bars, except for the uniform.
Exactly.
I've
It's a
seen I've
costume.
seen so many. Yeah, yes.
Yeah. And so, okay, so on that score, would you say that there's very little difference between the people who put them behind bars and the people who run the schools?
Yes.
Yeah.
Same people.
Because it's basically the same thing now. Like, everything, especially with the Columbine excuse, where they ignore the fact that those kids were isolated, bullied, mistreated, etc., and that's the reason they did those things. Let's do gun control. Let's install metal detectors. Let's install security cameras. Let's make big ass cement block walls in the hallways so that people can hide behind them from the gunfire that results from the system we created. Let's ignore the fact that all these other entrances exist that staff can go in without those things. Let's ignore that the biggest threat to students is always the teachers and the faculty. Let's make it seem like the real threat is the fellow students so that we can continue the bullying cycle and pin all the blame for the problems of the system on the students rather than the people who run the system.
And all of those implementations that you were talking about that started in about 1985, it's been so successful. School shootings only have gone up, right? Like you can add all the cameras you want, you can add all the metal detectors you want, and it doesn't make any difference. I want to bring up, just so I don't forget, remediation rates in colleges, because that's something that I don't know that everyone knows about. In the California community, and I'm sorry to switch tracks.
No, it's fine. This is a free-form
Okay,
show. Like, as long as the
groovy,
discussion's on topic and interesting.
groovy, and I'm scattered anyway. But okay, California Community College remediation rates. What that means is the students who are coming in from high school, So 13 years of formal education, 90% require remediation in either like English and writing and or math. 90%. The better schools, so the Cal State schools are above 50% remediation, and even the UC schools, the creme de la creme. Now, like Berkeley only has a 6% remediation rate. I can't believe they have any, but 6%. But UC Merced has, I wrote it down somewhere. Anyway, closer to 37 or 38%. Our kids cannot read.
Well, and it doesn't help that, like, even the bigger, the more prestigious schools, these schools are taking community college students, not high school students. They're not taking kids who haven't had remediation. They're taking kids who had remediation elsewhere.
They're not being, okay, they were not, the community colleges have not been able to remediate. Okay, and in 2011, this big problem kind of came to the forefront, not for the general public, but since my husband's in the system, we're aware of it. And I have documentation from the chancellor stating this. So so the community colleges were tasked to try to remediate in 2 years what the schools weren't, the elementary schools, or they couldn't do
In 13.
13 years, exactly. So they were supposed to, but that failed. So what they did is they stopped requiring placement tests altogether. So they just stopped testing them. And then the remediation rate is gone.
Whoops.
No need to remediate. Yep, the problem doesn't exist anymore.
I pretend it does not exist. Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, and just to, like, I want to read a thread that I wrote and get your impression on it, because I think it sort of strikes at the heart of a lot of these issues. Because I saw somebody, and I'm not going to say who, advocating metal detectors in schools. And I thought that was fucking moronic, because I know that how things work.
Yeah.
So what I said was, just put metal detectors in schools, in quotes. No. Metal detectors are largely security theater, and unless your metal detectors also included an X-ray machine for all backpacks, they could basically put anything they wanted in one if they did it right, because they have metal backpacks too. Plus, schools are already underfunded. Instead of putting that funding into healthier, less depressing food and activities, better teachers, a higher teacher-student ratio for less impersonal experience and more, you treat kids like terrorists and prisoners, you hacks. There's a concept called security theater. From Wiki, the practice of taking security measures that are intended to provide the feeling of improved security while doing little or nothing to achieve it. And, quote, metal detectors in schools are exactly that. You gonna put them in staff entrances too? Ban metal from everyone? No? Then a kid who sneaks into the staff entrance can catch people with artificially high confidence in your security unawares. Or hey, just use something plastic, like the prisoner you make him feel like. Say what you want about the guy, but Adam Conover is right about the TSA. These security measures literally don't stop people committed to doing what they will. So yeah, yell at me. Sure, I'm a heartless monster, right? I don't have any solutions. Or do I? This is all symptom treating. All of it. If you want the truth about Homeland Security, it's just a method to keep the American people scared enough to accept control. A control which wouldn't even happen without blowback. What's blowback? And I included an article from Foreign Policy that says, it's the occupation, stupid. Schools are no different. Oftentimes, they create enviros hostile to the child, large class sizes, demeaning teachers, conformity enforcement, biased treatment, shit-ass nutrition, constant surveillance, almost no fun, unethical wake-up hours, and more. Kids are mad? No way. So, hey, staff, instead of treating the symptom, which is what you're doing with noise like metal detectors, realize the causes and make less of these cases crop up, By doing your goddamn jobs better. And administration helped them do that by putting more money in class and less in sports, you hacks. If there isn't a school in your area willing to be respectful to your kids in these ways, consider homeschool, Montessori or Waldorf, unschooling, because these glorified babysitting prisons ain't the way. Imagine endorsing security theater for kids. Couldn't be me, sis.
Perfect. I couldn't have said it better. Absolutely. The stupid metal detectors. First, there's self-fulfilling prophecy. All you're doing is creating an environment that feels even more prison-like. The kids don't feel safe. The kids know they're not safe. How about like all the security measures? Okay, assuming Sandy Hook happened the way we were told, how did that work for them? All their security measures. That's not the answer at all. And like you said, it's treating the symptom. It's just a symptom. We have to find the problem. And the problem is nobody cares. Teachers, the big joke now, teachers are pretending to teach and the students are pretending to learn. As long as they get A's, they don't complain.
Well,
and that's sickening.
And of course, they don't complain a lot of the times, even when they don't. There's a phrase floating around, D's get degrees.
Oh, yeah. Ours is C's to get degrees. The same thing. Yeah. Oh, and it used to be where most students got C's because that was the average score. And now they get A's. Almost everybody, it's A's for making an effort. If you show up and do the work that you're given, you'll get an A.
And it's graded
Probably.
on a very aggressive curve, right?
Not where my husband teaches. There's no need for it, but it really hurts. It hurts the students who care.
Because the curriculum is nerfed, essentially.
It's dumbed down. We did not send our son. My husband and I are educated. We did not want our son to be educated.
Yeah.
He's self-educated, and he is smarter than. Anyway, I'd hold him up against any college grad.
So the way I put that is that there's a difference between school.
There you go. You came back. You paused. There's a difference between schooling and education. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes I use it interchangeably, and I shouldn't.
Oh, that's fine. Let me make sure that the stream is good.
You came back.
Okay, cool. Yeah, all right. Yeah. Sometimes the connection is not good here. I think I occasionally make the joke that either the CIA or NSA don't want us to have fun.
That's a fact.
And specifically, I was on Magnus Panvidia's show the other day to talk about CIA influence in big tech. So I
like that. Yep.
Yeah. So
yep.
I have issues with these people, but anyway, to get back to the point, school is a Prussian thing, and it was always designed for indoctrination, to make people more willing to do what the government says. And that's the thing. I don't, and this is my cynical asshole bullshit coming out, right? I don't see. Yeah, I don't see much difference between nationalism and globalism on a historical level, because the goal of any government is to expand as much as possible, and that means that the end goal of every nationalist in charge is globalism. If you can rule the world, that's better than ruling one place. It's a bigger tax farm. So basically, the banksters, the financial elite, the people behind the system, Bilderbergers,
the international corporations,
they all love both globalism because of its ability to expand an empire to the globe, and nationalism, which makes people okay with it because at least we're not over there. At least we're not in the worst parts of it. Nobody in a cobalt harvesting nation is nationalistic. And whenever they do get too nationalistic, the globalists tamp them down. Gaddafi was killed because he...
That's, I was just thinking, yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, my whole idea is these people were always building nations for the empire. Like, the American Revolution was funded by French and Dutch gold, and bonds and shit. And they wanted it that way for that reason, because it allows them to basically create people who are proud of where they are, even though it's still contributing to the system that they claim to hate. So, and that's sort of what I see in schools too. It mirrors it because it's supposed to. Like, the Prussian system mirrors it because it's supposed to. It makes people okay with being in the system because at least they're not those guys. At least they're not that group. At least they're not those kids. At least they're not in that neighborhood or in that school or in those circumstances. It's always pointing the finger at somebody else and saying, there but for the grace of us go you.
And that makes me think of all of the people that I know who admit that the school systems are poor, but our school isn't bad. Everybody says that, and they're wrong, because their school is bad.
Yeah, hella.
And like, none of them are good.
Well,
if
because of the nature of school. Like,
yes, exactly.
And people don't understand that because they've never heard it said school. They've always said school, and they think it's American, and just as American as apple pie. They don't think school. They don't think kindergarten. They don't think principal. They don't think these are all like, those words for a reason, because it comes from the same mentality that you would call Nazis in any other circumstance.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And like the Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist.
Yeah, it's all to train people to obedience.
Yes.
And then like the Bellamy Salute, we can't do that one anymore.
No, I know, and nobody knew. Like, when I figured, when I learned that in, I don't know, 2014 or something. Anyway, it blew my mind. And anyway, nobody seemed to care, and I don't know why.
Yeah,
I care.
For sure. Well, and people don't care because they're invested in the system. Like, if we don't pump out these kids, they're not going to build our profits. They're not going to do our, work in our factories, be our government employees, be our military cannon fodder.
We don't even have factories anymore.
Yeah.
We don't even have factories. So everybody that I know, practically, works either in some sort of government job or, before COVID, at Disneyland, because of the area I work in. Those are the two main employers.
Right. Well,
Big.
Or like, an Amazon distribution center or a Walmart or some other hyper corporate job. And they get paid like shit to be cogs in the machine.
Yeah, and they know it. At least they know it. The government workers don't seem to know it.
Yeah, well, that's because they're supposed to be proud, and they're never supposed to talk shit about the government. And if they do, they get fired. Or worse, like especially the higher security level jobs, they get fired or worse, meaning that they can lose their licenses, they can have their lives uprooted, they can get thrown in prison.
All of the retirement taken.
Yep. Yeah, so they're really invested in making sure that the system keeps going. I still remember, and I'm not going to say who it is, I don't want them to be dogpiled or whatever, but there was this person who was very angry at me for being anarchist because they're anemic, and they were accusing me of being ableist because I had the audacity to say that without government, if people aren't willing to support you, then you probably don't deserve it. There are plenty of people with anemia with jobs. And I sent them links to Anemia Foundation stuff and said basically, you can do this. I believe in you. There are people who have anemia who have these jobs. You could work from home, and then we wouldn't have to have the oppressive government structure. Then
you can join a church. My church has a fabulous welfare system, and it is voluntary.
Yeah. Well, and
People talk about, like compulsory tithing. It is not compulsory. Nothing happens if you don't pay. It
y-
is fully voluntary.
yeah, and of course, this person had nothing to say to that, nothing reasonable. So
Right.
he just called me ableist, insulted me for liking Sonic the
And yet
Hedgehog.
bipolar. Like, how are you ableist?
Exactly. Like they claim I'm not disabled, but I have a condition that means I need to shut down during the middle of the day, or I have extreme anxiety and depression. Yeah, I'm totally just the normalest person. Also, night terrors ever since I was 4, and sometimes I wake up with one and can't get back to sleep without repeatedly standing up from my bed and making sure that there are no enemies nearby. Um, yeah, it's. But I'm totally just normal. Anyway, point is that, like,
Isn't the government helping you so much?
yeah, right?
Thank
Yeah.
God for the government.
Without the
Yeah.
government, who would give me these conditions and make them worse? Um, and I'm assuming it has something to do with the environment that I was in, but I do kind of know for a fact that I was hit on the head when I was a baby by a falling bottle that during a massive earthquake. So there was that, but like I don't couch everything in that. I assume that there's something happened, but even that might just be a specter in my mind. It might just be a spook. Because I was considered a genius growing up. I was in gifted and talented. But they simultaneously were constantly talking about all the things that were wrong with me. So it's like they wanted to encourage me to do the good things, but they didn't want me to be myself, which would have been the bad things. So it was a weird dichotomy, yeah, to be sure. I want to get to some of these comments. We have somebody in chat who is a new listener. Nakuma says, I still think it's madness how a letter can easily make a kid fall down an endless path of agony. In fact, a study showed that even elementary schoolers were harming themselves because of grades. And those policies only make the kids more depressed, making them more likely to do a shooting.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's grading is ridiculous. That's not how learning works. It com That's not how learning works. Like, I would suggest to everyone to read John Taylor Gatto or watch a lecture. He explains things so beautifully.
Right.
I can't do it justice, but
Maybe I should get him on the show. I've seen him
he's
do
dead.
appearances.
He
Oh,
died.
oh,
He
okay.
died.
How recently?
Yeah. Last year, 18 months, something. He had a stroke and wasn't well. But man, we lost a treasure.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
well.
Charlotte Iserby.
Ah, okay. I'll look into her. I've never heard of her before. You,
She's,
maybe you could send me some like links about her.
oh, happy to.
Um, we also have I remember the kids who would say if schools didn't exist, how would we get education? Simple. We
Yeah.
wouldn't. We would get actual knowledge used in the outside world. To abolish the school system is to truly better our future for our kids. All schools are bad. They're mental slaughterhouses. They kill the happiness of our children and make them more susceptible to crime and suicidal thoughts, all in the name of education. And we still continue to fund these things. Yeah, that seems
Yep.
reasonable.
Yep. And let me tell you, not that I have been an enormous professional success. I stayed home to raise my son. So, but I have never had a job where it required a degree. I didn't use any of what I learned. I didn't learn anything anyway. What I've learned on my own and through reading
Yeah, it's sort of like
and experience.
it's sort of like that song, like "And the hero will drown." I am an endless source of useless information. I've quoted that many times. Um, Earth Nerd says, and this was I think about your son's story, um,
Mhm.
that she, because I know she's into this too.
Mhm.
Um, that's amazing, and even if he doesn't stick with it, that's okay because he's always going to be growing and learning. What he picks up next will be just as amazing to see him pick up. She also said homeschooling co-ops are so cool.
Yep. And Yes, and my kid, and I don't know if it's his nature. It probably is. And I was lucky enough to pull him out before that got squished completely, but it took a while for it to come back. He is a sponge. He is Anyway, he looks for mentors, he looks for like opportunities. His job has essentially been an apprenticeship. Um, and where, like, if had I had a job like that when I was his age, I probably would have gone, done my job, gotten a paycheck, and that would be it. He learns. He looks around, he sees how businesses run, he sees what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. He's setting up social media for them. He's learning so many things that he would never have learned in school, ever.
Yeah,
And with the schools broken up in, like by periods, as soon as you start getting into something, a bell rings and you got to switch over to something else. That's crazy.
because it's Pavlovian. Because the whole
Hmm.
point is that they're waiting for that bell so that they can know that they've done good. And that's
Or be finished,
yeah,
or be
right?
finished.
Yeah, just that. That's one of the reasons that I think it's totally abusive for teachers to say, the bell doesn't dismiss you, I do. Like, that always hit me as something cruel. Like, no, don't include bells then. Like,
Right.
like don't have this thing go off and then hold us after like we're fucking prisoners being and
Oh,
then
the anxiety. Oh,
and then sometimes like hold us so late that we were late for the buses. We were poor, fucker. Don't do that to
yeah,
poor people.
right. And like, okay, the psychopathic fourth grade teacher my kid had, he didn't write um, his room number or something at the top of this paper. And so he was held in for recess for 3 days. And oh, I had an absolute fit. And anyway, the teacher, I made it very clear that no one in that school was allowed to punish my son if he did something that was, punishable. They were to talk to me and I would take care of it. That is not their job to punish my kid
Well,
with fake consequences.
right. And of course, the fact is that like this is what creates those authoritarian structures. This is what creates those people. Like all these petty tyrants who want to micromanage everything. Your typical
Micromanage fourth graders. Oh my God.
yeah, like your typical Discord mod, let's say. Um, the whole idea is that like when when we come out of these environments, we're taught like rugged obedience, absolute rote compulsory bullshit, uh, HOAs, uh, taxes, um, regulations. Don't start a lemonade stand if you don't have a business license. Don't be and it's even worse now. I can't imagine two things: the horrors of being a child during the age of social media, where I've had to literally help talk people down from the ledge, um, and the horrors of being a child in the age of COVID, where they're told to bully each other for not being conformist enough. Like, there are studies that say kids that bully each other have worse immune systems. And this is how you're treating COVID?
Yep.
Congratulations, you've raised a society of fundamentally sick people who justify their sickness and keep making other people sick. It's a vicious cycle.
Oh, and the kids who have committed suicide over this. Oh, I think it's an absolute travesty. Just to, so my son had, right before COVID hit, okay, so it was about 13 weeks before COVID hit, he had double mono. He had never been so sick. Anyway, so as he was finally recovering, he had been able to go out, I don't know, twice or something. Then COVID hit. And he said, I am not like, they're not, fuck them,
Yeah.
fuck them. So his boss said the same thing. So he just lived his life, and it was better. All the morons weren't around.
And of
But he
course, he
took
hasn't
full
really been sick
advantage.
since, right?
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No, and that's it. Well, we think he got COVID. He was not deathly ill, and that's after coming off of he had both Epstein-Barr virus and cytomegalovirus. It was awful. They thought he had AIDS. It was really scary. But anyway, even with his immune system the way it is, COVID did not, thank God, did not affect him very strongly. We all got it, and it didn't affect us much. And
You know,
I don't know.
a similar thing
What can I
happened
say?
with me and the swine flu. I caught that. I was laid up for like maybe 48 hours. And then after
Yeah.
about 3 days, it was gone. And I survived this thing that everybody was crying about. Oh, this is going to kill every kid in America. And like, I was back to school, you know?
Right, right. And the vaccine could have killed you
Yeah.
or done neurological damage.
Yeah. And so, like, we've got Nikuma in comments saying, I'm 16 and I've had to talk many people down. I was almost one of the kids that took their own life due to the school system. I had to rely on strangers to talk me down.
Mm, mm. That remind that reminds me of, and I'm sorry I talk about my son so much, but he's my most recent,
Yeah.
but when he was in elementary school, there was a kid he had been through since kindergarten with. And this poor kid, he was the outsider. He was bullied. The teachers were as bad as the students. It was awful. And I wasn't particularly involved. I heard about, uh, my son came home and said, Stevie said that he thought the world would be better off without him. So I went to the principal and said, there is a problem with one of your students. Why do I know about it? And like, why do I know about it?
Yeah.
And anyway, the kid he's okay, but in fifth grade,
Yeah.
suicidal in the fifth grade?
Well,
That's bad.
let me tell you, I was. Like,
Oh,
I've had both at various points in my life, I have had both suicidal and homicidal ideations. And I think it's largely to do with how the system reacted. Like, they would have rather put me on antidepressants until I died because they would have been trying to figure out what was wrong and they would just be throwing darts and they wouldn't actually be
yeah,
hitting anything because
yeah,
they never even considered bipolarism. So,
yeah. Oh, and doctors come out of the same system. Oh, my little bird hit the window.
mm,
Um, oh, it'll be okay. Doctors come out of the same system,
yeah.
and they want to just diagnose us and put labels on us. And sometimes, most of the time, they're wrong. How many diagnoses did I get before I was finally diagnosed correctly with ADHD? And oh my God, I lost years of my life to being improperly medicated. Um, I was medicalized. It's just like school system. It's just like school.
Yeah, well, and he regrets this. We're on good terms now and I'm not trying to bring up old shit. But my father thought I was demon possessed for the longest time because of the way my nightmares were, because of the way my energy levels were, because of not being able to stop crying when I started. Um, a variety of other things. He thought that there was something severely wrong with me, not the least of which is that one of my night terrors when I was very young made me terrified of my shoes because they were making painful moaning sounds and walking across my desk, and I felt like I was fully awake. Um, so I thought my shoes had become possessed, and I started to develop in my nightmares these mental situations where like my shoes were like flesh suckers and they were coming to eat me and shit like that. And instead of like the doctors realizing this kid's got some chemical imbalances, and maybe we should let him be and let him explore his mentality. Everybody was always about suppression, you know, and like my father recognizes that now, and like we're not on bad terms. Like we talk twice a week, for hours. So I'm not saying that that's still the way it is, but the medical system and the way it worked with schools, because they wanted me to behave rather than be me. Um, that created who I am today, the extremely negative, cynical, pessimistic asshole who's like constantly on people about shit. Like I wouldn't be this way without them. So, you know, I have them to thank. They created the rebel.
Right, right. And who can blame you? Like, they took a little sensitive child and they squished you,
Yeah.
and they were under management,
And
you
that's what they
know?
do with
That's,
everyone.
that's what they do to everyone.
And like that's why I'm so sensitive about kids specifically. Like I try, you know, when they are kids, to at least at first recognize that and let them grow. Like if they're gonna do intentionally harmful things to other people, then yeah, I might bring down some angry words. But like ultimately, what I try to do is I try to understand people, because, and I don't think that's what the school system does.
No. Oh, no, it's the exact opposite. It's the opposite.
So do you have any examples of like a squished down student?
Oh, all of them. Me. All of us. Um, all of us. I don't know anybody that, well, my husband said thinks or looks back on his school days fondly. Now, he comes from a very abusive family, so it was better than that.
Yes.
That doesn't make it good.
Yeah, no. Like a lot of people come from an abusive family, and the military is better. It doesn't mean it's better because they're watching their buddies die in front of them. You know, seeing those intestines spilled out, lost limbs, you know, psychopathy, and fucking losing their mental grip, and eventually being one of the multiple veterans a day who kills themselves. That's not good for people, but it's better than being hit at home. It's better than having guns pointed at them. It's better than being part of a gang because your family is in the wrong circles. It's better than the poverty that creates all this situation, because you're getting direct cash and you don't have to worry about your finances unless you drink them all away because you're one of the substance abuse veterans, you know? It's a fucked up system.
Yeah, yes, it is. Yes, it is. And when I finally figured that out, it changed my whole perspective. It's been about 10 years, and I can't support the system. And so one way I could fight against that was to not feed the beast, and I wouldn't sacrifice my child to that beast.
Yeah. Well, you know, child sacrifice is pretty good with these people, you know? That nice owl statue in the middle of Bohemian Grove, you know? Um, so they're totally not
Yeah.
sacrificing a real child, though. They promise. Um,
Oh, right, right. And well, and yeah. And how about the states that allow middle school kids to have abortions
hmm
without parental consent? Like,
Well, and they teach these kids all these things about how to engage in sex, rather than.
oh my God, we could talk about that. Yes.
So, I mean, that's to me that subject is pretty much encapsulated by, if parents were the ones teaching their kids, this wouldn't be a problem, because the parents could just know what was being taught. Um, like my one of my primary things is responsible fucking, like not having a kid, not doing the things that might cause you to have a kid if you're not prepared for it, and if you don't have the financial wherewithal to do it. Um, but a kid doesn't even need to know that. You know, a high schooler who's horny and gets handed a condom might forget to put it on.
Right. Right. Uh,
But like that wouldn't happen if they were
well,
fucking parented.
and it's the pushing. Yeah, except well, except it happens anyway because like we were very open sexually with as far as education with our son, but we also had a church standards. So there was that. So we had anyway, and I know some people don't have that. That's fine. But when Matt was in the fifth grade, I think they did sex ed or whatever they called it. But they had kids sitting in co-ed groups, and to desensitize them to like body words or whatever, they'd have them all shout vagina, labia, penis, foreskin. When my kid is sitting next to the little girl he's in Sunday school with,
Mm-hmm.
like that's so, it's not they talk about ass play. Ugh. Like
Yeah.
what? Anyway, my son, as it happens, is gay, and there is no sensitivity around that.
Yeah.
They give lip service to sensitivity. There isn't.
Right.
He did not come out in school when he was about 10 or 11, but, didn't discuss it. I don't blame the school for that, but I do blame this for all their talk of tolerance. There's no tolerance.
Yeah. And they also like I've had kids come to me and say that they were bullied in school because of their sexuality, and that when they fought back, they were sent home, referrals.
Zero tolerance.
Yeah.
Zero tolerance.
And so, it ironically, and this is the irony cropping up again, the tolerance bred the zero tolerance, and vice versa. So, like, you had this culture where they felt like they had to tolerate, but at the same time, you had the culture that created the intolerance, and they fed into each other. It's a self-creating problem. And so, ultimately, it created a bunch of bigots and a bunch of bigot victims who both felt victimized by the system. And, yeah, that's not a good environment for kids to be in.
No, and it creates cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
How can it not?
Well, and okay, I was already sort of knowledgeable about this in like the third grade, and like the sex ed stuff, and like I remember because I thought it was like fine to discuss and would just be laughed off. I thought it'd be funny. We were drawing snowmen, and we were supposed to get up in front of the class and describe what our snowman was, and like I had drawn buttons, and at the last minute, I thought to point at one of them and say, "And this is its dick." I got suspended
Right.
for that. But
Okay.
the class thought it was funny,
But
and I already knew what it was because the school system taught me. So it's like, do you not want us to say these things? Do you not want us to know these things? Or do you? You gotta pick.
they had my kid shouting it with the little girl he was in Sunday school with, so that would be really confusing.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, is it bad or isn't it?
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think it's like a constant issue of like how to put this specifically. It's like I think the term is Skinner trap, Kafka trap. It's a Kafka trap where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah.
Like they want you to know these things, but they don't want you to say it. They'll assign you Huck Finn and then get mad when you read all the words. You know?
Right. Right. Yep.
So,
Well, out of school. I'm not even sure if it's relevant. I'm so distanced now. I don't care what they teach or what they don't. I don't know why a parent sends their kid. They're absolutely desperate.
right.
And I do feel for parents that have no other choice. I mean, we have been indoctrinated to send our kids to school, like we set our lives up, we get our jobs, um, but damn, sometimes we got to pivot.
Yeah. So
And when I was fighting against Common Core, my only solution that I could, like the opt out forms, that's no solution. That's no solution. I thought the only solution, the only one I can see is homeschooling. And it doesn't have to look, luckily in California, we're able to do that quite freely. Um, but so many parents think that homeschooling has to look like schooling.
yeah,
And it can look any way you want. And there are no educational emergencies.
100%. Yeah. So okay. So just to, because it's about 2 hours at this point, just to generally give the gist, uh, what would you say to a teacher, to a parent, and to a kid about schooling?
Okay, to a teacher, well, depending on their age, if they're old enough, I say retire. If they're young, I would say find another occupation because you're not going to, it's like handcuffs because they get you with those damn benefits and their money's not going to be there anyway. Anyway, I would not be a teacher for anything. To students, I would say maybe, what is it called? The Teenager's Guide to Unschooling, maybe? I can get you the name of it. But it's a book teaching kids how to convince their parents to let them be homeschooled. And the parents, I would say, really take a look. Just Google Google remediation rates. That's a start. Read John Taylor Gatto or Charlotte Iserby. Educate yourself. That's what I would say.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up. Unless we got anything in chat. Uh, yeah, it looks like it's pretty much just what we were already saying. But yeah. All right. Well, if anybody new here would like to, you can support me with the links in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. Um, I'll include her Twitter handle if she doesn't mind in the tweet for this. All right. Because you can find her at Rescind2, RECYND2. Is there any other place you would like to plug? Any other thing you would like to plug?
Maybe look up Sandra Dodd. Much of her material is kind of being lost to time, but I found her very valuable. So.
All right, awesome. All right, well, thank you for coming on and sharing your perspective. If you or anybody else knows any teachers or educators, etc., who would like to also come on and vent about the school system, feel free to hit me up. I think maybe you said that your husband might be interested, so
we'll see. His health
We'll see.
is poor, but I know he would like to talk, so I'll talk to him.
Gotcha.
So we'll see.
Yeah, because
Thank you so much.
I want to get as many perspectives as possible, as many different people. Because if it's just like me, especially, and if it's also me and a couple people who agree with me, it's not as
Right.
good as 20 people all saying like, yeah, you know what, fuck this shit.
Right. So I get it.
If
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Because it's all about trying to learn what it's like that line from Dune, the first step in avoiding a trap is knowing of its existence. So the whole point is to try and learn from history and be better. That's what anarchy is. It's about learning enough about the authority structures that we don't replicate them in the future. So, with that being said, peacefully parent, responsibly fuck, and don't fuck your kids up by putting them through exactly what you were. That would be my takeaway.
Perfect. Oh, perfect.
All right, well, with that being said, see you out there. Smash the state.
Smash the state. I'll let you shut me off because I don't know how.
There's an end stream